It is quite a race in the Big Ten Western Division. We've got four teams at 3-2. We've got Northwestern a game back, and of course the Hawkeyes and the Wildcats get together on Saturday at Wrigley Field. We've got Bradley Locker on the line. You can catch him on Inside NU on SB Nation. Bradley, how you doing today?
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for having me on. Doing pretty well. It's a fun Halloween. It was actually snowing here in Evanston, so I don't know about where you guys are, but a little uncharacteristic. I almost felt like it was Christmas time, even though it's a little premature for that. But
I saw Dave Revson's post today. He was not happy about it, and I'm not planning on being at Wrigley Field this weekend. I actually had the fleeting thought of seeing what tickets are like and running over there. People who know me know I've covered a couple of games in the press box, and just from my personal standpoint, it's, first of all, I don't know what it'd be like covering a football game at Wrigley Field from the press box. What is the press box like at Wrigley? Have you been there before, Bradley?
I actually have. I covered a Northwestern Notre Dame baseball game at Wrigley Field last spring, so that was pretty conventional, all things considered. It was a lot emptier, of course, than a usual Wrigley Field press box would be. But I think what's going to be weird is that there's no home plate per se that's directly aligned with a press box. It's probably going to be one of the corners of the end zone and a diagonal kind of view, whereas we're more accustomed to looking closer to the 50-yard line, maybe being at the 40-yard line from the press box. And I think we may, as the media, get a chance to kind of review the setup and how things are going to work this upcoming Friday. But I think, yeah, that's an interesting part for me, because when Northwestern played at Wrigley Field in 2021, I went as a fan in the bleachers and kind of in the outfield traditionally of Wrigley. So it wasn't totally exactly the same viewpoint. So that's going to be pretty unique for sure.
33 degrees right now in Chicago, but 58 for a high on Saturday.
Got it. The warm air is moving through. It's been, you guys are getting the cold air that we've had the last couple of days, but yeah, it's supposed to warm up, and I don't know how long that will last, but at least through Saturday, it sounds like. And this is an intriguing game, not only because of the fact that it's being played at Wrigley, but Northwestern's ability to score points. I mean, they scored 21 points against Minnesota here a couple of weeks ago in a comeback victory, win in overtime. They won on explosive plays against a Maryland team last week that is known for making explosive plays. It's also a Maryland team that's known for kind of, I don't even know. How would you quantify what Maryland does year after year under what's his face, Mark? Would you say they kind of fold like a wet paper bag?
There you got it. But, you could go that range. Yeah.
But they are known for big plays, and I'm just surprised with a new quarterback. Obviously, we know about the storylines with Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. They've been able to produce the offense they have.
No, that's definitely fair. I think the offensive production, especially with Brendan Sullivan under center, the backup for Northwestern has been very surprising. Last week in particular, he really did not look all that comfortable nor effective against Nebraska out in Lincoln. Left some points out on the board. There was a particularly egregious misread where tight end Marshall Lang was wide open in the flat, and Sullivan's really never saw him, and then Northwestern had to kick a field goal on that drive. It was a very bitter game for Northwestern. A lot of bad tastes left in the mouths of players, of fans, of coaches, really everybody affiliated with the program. And David Braun has done just an absolutely amazing job at allowing this team to reset, come out with a fire under it after a loss. And I think that's what we saw from the get-go against Maryland. Northwestern scored 14 points in the first quarter, which had not happened in quite a long time. I think it actually, and the Wildcats on top of that, scored 24 in the first half, and they hadn't done that in 3 years since they last took on Maryland at Ryan Field. So maybe that's just something about playing Maryland at Ryan Field. But I think we saw much more poise and comfortable Brendan Sullivan in the pocket. I still think Northwestern's offense has plenty of areas to improve, and I think the coaches would say the same thing. The running game has really been very ineffective for much of the season, a combination of bad run blocking and running backs that haven't been super, I guess, really elusive in the hole, nor able to hit the hole quickly. But I think the passing offense with Bryce Kurtz, AJ Henning, Cam Johnson has really taken strides this year under new receivers coach Armand Binns. Going to be a much tougher matchup against the Hawkeyes and their stingy secondary and defense overall compared to Maryland, which lost 2 NFL draft corners. But no, I think that offensive production has been a very bright spot, and to some extent with some areas for room to improve too.
Yeah, so exactly. The last time we talked to you was prior to the Nebraska game, and Northwestern gets 2 interceptions right out of the gate in the first 6 or 7 minutes. Can't do much with it. I think they get a field goal off of 1. It's a very ugly, low-scoring, tight to the vest kind of game. And then Malachi Coleman gets behind someone late and widens the gap. And then to see the team explode to a certain extent, and I'm using in the Northwestern realm exploding on offense. And that's not an insult, because it's, as I stated to you a couple of weeks ago, just rather impressive what this team's done this season, to be in contention, to be, now defeating teams like Minnesota and Maryland. Could you see any kind of talent difference between those two teams on the field? Because it's supposed to be that way, and Northwestern's supposed to be at a decided disadvantage against just about anyone, and especially a team like Maryland.
I mean, I think there's no doubt that Maryland, for sure, as you mentioned, is just a better team point blank than Northwestern. And I think you can't also ignore the fact that Maryland just played a pretty bad football game in a lot of ways against Northwestern. Talia Tagovailoa did not really look very accurate or comfortable, which is uncharacteristic of him and what we've seen over the course of his career. Now, I guess it's a few straight weeks where he hasn't really looked like his usual self. But there's a play that I think in particular stands out from that game where Maryland was driving down the field with basically inside of 2 minutes to go, no timeouts, and Northwestern was surrendering 6 or 7 yards of play. And I think most Northwestern fans thought, oh boy, here we go again. Northwestern looks amazing, going to blow the game, and Maryland's going to take the lead with, 30 seconds left. But there was a pass by Tagovailoa down the sideline, I want to say it was to one of his tight ends, where he led him way too far up the field. If he hit him in stride in the chest, it was going to be probably a 30-yard gain. Maryland would have been inside the red zone with a minute to go. And that just kind of epitomized the game it was for Tagovailoa. So on one hand, yes, Northwestern's defense played a very good game altogether. I believe had 6 sacks, which was the most in, I want to say, 6 years. Aiden Hubbard won Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week with 3 sacks of his own. The Wildcats forced 2 takeaways for the second straight game, a really encouraging sign there for a defense that has struggled to be opportunistic this year, especially in clutch time with Coco Azuma getting that late interception, snaring it before it hit the ground. But at the same time, the Northwestern defense still gave up plenty of separation, allowed almost 400 yards to Maryland, 27 points. So I don't know that David Braun was exactly euphoric with the defensive performance per se as the defensive coordinator, but talent-wise, I think there's no question that most of the teams that Northwestern is playing against, Iowa, Wisconsin coming up, are for sure a lot more talented, but we're starting to see some of that coaching play a role, and that's where I think David Braun has just excelled as a head coach and minimized that deficiency with really good coaching and inspiring his players to go out and compete.
There are some parallels with these two programs, Mark. You think about the fact that, first of all, there were a lot of parallels when Coach Fitz was there. Ironically enough, Coach Fitz was in Kinnick here a few weeks ago, showcasing his 2 kids. But the reason I bring up the parallels is because, preseason, you have a late coaching change, kind of a weird coaching change, not a lot of people expected, given the, if you want to call it the hazing scandal involving Fitz, and you jump into a season all of a sudden under very different circumstances. And although Brian Ferentz is still going to be a part of this offense for the final 4 to 5 games, this is not something Iowa fans expected a week and a half ago, to be dealing with a coordinator shift, or at least an announcement, as people keep saying, this idea of a lame duck offensive coordinator. I will say this, I cannot imagine Iowa's secondary giving up what Maryland gave up. And I don't even know what were what's his face's finals. What's the quarterback's name again?
Brendan Sullivan is going to be the starting quarterback in this one. He is the backup, but Ben Bryant is expected to be out again per David Braun.
Yeah. And so is Sullivan, you think Sullivan's won the job if Bryant comes back?
I don't think so. I think Sullivan has definitely had flashes. Even against Nebraska, we saw it a little bit too. He had some nice plays where really strong in particular. He kind of evaded pressure, stepped up in the pocket, and hit Bryce Kurtz down the sideline in stride for a 66-yard gain. And Northwestern did nothing really after that on offense and had to settle for a field goal. But this was kind of the game we finally saw everything that had been in a pan materialize for Sullivan. The run game, he had 57 rushing yards. That was almost 30 more yards than any other Wildcat. He was effective on the ground, really strong through the air. He had 3 big-time throws per Pro Football Focus. A Wildcat quarterback hadn't done that in a game since the Citrus Bowl in 2021, for context, which is almost 2 full seasons beyond that. So I don't think Sullivan has won the job. I think he's still looking for that consistency, and whether or not that appears this week against Iowa is probably going to dictate how a lot of this game goes. But there's no question that Northwestern knows that Ben Bryant is a starting quarterback. David Braun established that even in July at Big Ten Media Days, basically saying this team needs an ultimate bona fide starting quarterback. It is Ben Bryant. He's been pretty solid for most of the year. Basically, the question is just when is he going to be healthy enough to return? And right now, it's still too early to say that.
Somebody told me last night on our live show with Coach Patterson, I think total margin last year, point differential last year for Northwestern was like was it like 160 or something insane like that? I've never heard of a number quite like that. And, I mean, I understand that Northwestern right now, they're playing potentially for a bowl berth. I mean, they win this Saturday, they're probably going to make a bowl game. I mean, they got a couple of winnable games left on the schedule, including a rivalry game against Illinois that would end up, if they win this Saturday, would end up being a play-in for a bowl game. But it's amazing the differential. I mean, they've played some good teams this year. You think about, the loss to Penn State, of course. Rutgers, I think that game at Rutgers Piscataway, that's the one game I've watched Northwestern from start to finish, and I wasn't really impressed with much of anything. But you got to remember, I mean, that was a first game following this colossal tenure from Pat Fitzgerald, and I'm not saying that affected them. Rutgers is a dangerous team as well, but it just seems like after the Duke manhandling, they've just been a different team. And I think about, Nebraska. Nebraska's defense, I know they play in a weak offensive division, but they rank top 25 in almost every defensive metric that you can imagine. So I don't know. So, I mean, they've been, with the exception of being Penn State, and that's one of the best teams. They were with Penn State. Let's not forget that game was close at halftime. A week after Penn State pulled Iowa's pants down. So, I think fans ought to be ready for a weird game. Also, Kirk brought up the only other time he's ever coached in a baseball stadium was the Pinstripe Bowl back in 2017. Everybody was slipping around and sliding around on the ice. I'm wondering, do you know, Bradley, given the fact that you're a Northwestern guy, other games have been played at Wrigley, field conditions, I mean, it's not going to be that cold, so I wouldn't think we're going to have a problem with ice, an icy field, icy turf like we had out at Yankee Stadium. But what are conditions like? Is it windier than playing over at Ryan Field, or what can we expect?
I don't know if that much is going to be different. And I guess even though I do cover Northwestern pretty religiously, I don't know if I would consider myself a stadium expert in terms of playing a football game in a baseball stadium versus in a football stadium. The one thing logistically that will be unique is that both teams will be using the same sideline. So they'll be kind of splitting that in half. And David Braun mentioned that when we talked to him yesterday, that it will present some basically unique challenges, is what he said. And the teams will have to get accustomed to coming in from the same direction. I don't know if that much of this game is going to be that different. I mean, there will probably be unique graphics that are shown at Wrigley Field. Maybe Take Me Out to the Ball Game will be sung at some point. They'll see the foul poles and the ivy and all the traditional accoutrement of Wrigley Field. But I still am expecting predominantly Iowa fans, 75 to 80% Iowa fans at least, just given this game is in the Chicago area. And as you mentioned, it's still an Iowa Northwestern game. It's still Big Ten West football. There's a reason the over-under was set at 29.5. I don't think playing this game in Wrigley Field is going to change a whole lot of the identities of these two teams. It just kind of adds another layer of a special element to this game and puts it on a bigger stage, even though it won't be broadcast on that big of a stage, being on Peacock. But
now, if I really wanted to go there, I would make some kind of comment as to how Michigan would handle being on the same sideline with their opponent. I don't know how that would work. And I don't know if that makes it easier, more difficult, whatever. Got plenty of our Michigan contingent here. All right. Then the other thing that I thought of when you talked about both teams being on the same sideline, and it's not super unique. It happens in bowl games, baseball stadiums. But let's say if the play's down at the 10-yard line, one of the teams has to cross past the other team to get to their side of the football, if you think about that. So I don't know if there's any they obviously aren't going to charge right through the other team. I wonder if there's some kind of a protocol as to you got to kind of run in the open part of the field and circle around to your side of the football. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, it is going to be weird, but I did have the memory of, you talked about the slipping in the Pinstripe Bowl. Well, 2 years ago when Northwestern took on Purdue in Wrigley Field, there was a little bit of slipping, but it was primarily from Purdue's kicker. He had two accidental onside kicks, just basically lost his footing on two kickoffs, and I believe Purdue got both of them. So that added to the weirdness of the game. Also, Milton Wright for Purdue had 3 touchdowns in that game, which you almost never see happen in a Big Ten West game, especially between Northwestern and Purdue. So it was definitely memorable in a lot of ways. And I guess I'm sure the field has probably been tweaked and has been tested and things like that to make sure similar things don't happen. But
Iowa fans are used to giving up 3 touchdowns to a Purdue wide receiver, just for the record, Bradley, which is ironic given Phil Parker and the Iowa defense, what they stand for. I think it's interesting. You said 70. You expect 75 to 80% of the crowd be Iowa fans, and I said that to Mark. I mean, we said that months ago when this was initially announced. I said it's going to be a home game basically for Iowa, but if it's 75 to 80%, that's going to be astonishing. I mean, astonishing. Now, I watched part of Northwestern Maryland just a little bit, and I'll try to watch that back in whole before I come out with my preview this week. There was nobody in the stands. There's nobody at these games. I mean. How many? What was the official? Can I look this official? What do you want to guess?
19,000.
Oh, it's way under 19,000. I'm gonna guess it was probably like 11,000.
But I think the official number was 19. Really? I think I did look at it because I watched some of the game as well, and I thought, how many people are at this game?
You're right. The official count was 19,000. That has to be total number of tickets sold, not actual bodies and seats.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually not physically present at the game. I was engineering it for our radio station in the studio. But I mean, just seeing it on TV and even just walking over across campus, it was probably 10:45, and you usually see a lot of Northwestern students bustling and getting with one another to go to games and wait for the bus shuttle. And I basically saw nobody at all. And for context, I mean, it was the Saturday after the Friday of Halloween weekend, and a lot of people like going out and doing stuff. So an early kick and Northwestern taking on a team that a lot of people thought was just going to dominate the Wildcats, definitely paired for a pretty bad matchup, not to mention the fact that it was significantly colder than it had been earlier last week. It was in the 60s and 70s, and it dropped all the way down to the 40s and 50s. So it was kind of a death knell when that happened. And at least the people who were there definitely got to relish in a really good win. So I'm happy for them.
I'm not necessarily going to buy any of those reasons, but I get them. I'm not saying that they are not part of the equation, but wow, a Big Ten team that anyway, now I forget where I was headed after this.
You were going to make fun of Northwestern some more, Mark.
I'm not making fun of Northwestern. It's just it astounds me. Let's consider that if anything, people should be galvanized, energized to get behind this team that was supposed to be a one-win football team. You know, had we known at the beginning of the season, had we had the Wagner score revealed to us, 23-20, I think all of us would have said, okay, they beat Wagner by 3. That's their one win. They're going to be awful the rest of the year because that's what most people anticipated. If anything, people should be a little excited that this team is competing and now winning. They've beaten 2 teams that are pretty good football teams.
Let me just say this, and no disrespect to Northwestern, Bradley, and I've said several times this week, this is a dangerous game for Iowa, but Iowa has no business losing. They have no business going there and losing. They just don't. If they go there and lose, it will be an awful loss, a terrible loss. And the wheels could come off if that happens. Now, they probably won't because Kirk Ferentz is a great head coach who understands how to get his guys to be resilient, but they've had a week to recover from a really weird loss against Minnesota. Now, I will say this: 2 years ago, you know what happened in the game 2 years ago it was brought to my attention because last night you saw the sign from the Iowa fan behind home plate of the World Series. Mm-hmm. Did you see that, Mark?
I did.
No. It was a Hawkeye fan, and in fact, I think I saw on Twitter that I believe he's, I don't even think he's an Iowa graduate. I think he's a Central College graduate, which is down in Pella, Iowa. But they figured out who it was. But a guy with a big Tiger Hawk right behind home plate of the World Series. And then at one point in the game, he had a little sign that all it said was, "It was not a fair catch." I thought that was great. But the reason I bring that up is back in 2021. What was it? How far in the game? How long into the game did that happen, Bradley? You had some students just all of a sudden just took over the game. It's just like it was a coup. I mean, they just took over the game. And the TV crews, the referees, everybody just got off the field, and these students were on the field protesting, had these big signs and banners. Don't you remember that, Mark? And
vaguely, I remember it. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's like, well, what's happening here? Well, apparently we've got a protest going on, and nobody was doing anything. You see these baseball games where these security guards go and lower their shoulder and, pull a Jadeveon Clowney type of move on these guys. And yet these protesters are allowed to be at midfield for like 15 minutes, just holding their signs up. I've never seen anything like it.
I vividly remember that because that was actually the first ever football game I covered in a press box. So it was definitely an introduction to the weirdness of the Big Ten West, I guess. But I want to say it was the third quarter. It was definitely the latter portion of the game. And my editors and I were kind of looking at each other and just texting and thinking, what do we really do here? How much do we cover this? It's not technically the game. So there were a lot of delicate conversations that were had for sure. But that game itself, I think it ended 17-12 Iowa, which is probably maybe about what the score could be this time around too.
Padilla started that game, right?
Yeah, he did.
Stat line was bad. No, I'm sorry. No, he did not start that game. Petrus played first quarter. He was banged up. Yeah. Then they took him out, yanked him. Padilla did not play well. But I remember thinking, hey, he did enough. And that's what you want that's what Kirk wants out of his Iowa quarterbacks right now, is to do enough to get a win and just not lose them the game.
Northwestern would be the place that I would expect above any other Big Ten stadium where that would go on longer than anywhere else. Number one, just because of the type school it is. It is a journalism school. There is a bent toward such things. And then on top of that, obviously, there's less people in the stadium. I can't imagine in Happy Valley or Ohio Stadium with 110,000 people watching the game and wanting football that would go on too long before there would be some kind of riot going in the other direction. Yeah, and the one defense for Northwestern and the small crowd would be that obviously it's a small school.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not drawing
plays
from
a role. And I mean, the student section, even at capacity, is probably a maximum of 800 to 1,000 people, but it was not close to capacity against Maryland. Usually the games fill up student-wise and really overall attendance-wise well into the first quarter. Just people trickling in after going to tailgates, and especially an 11 a.m. kick is just not going to help with those efforts. But I do think it's going to be a really substantial crowd. When Northwestern played Purdue, a big contingent of Northwestern fans went to that game. It was still mostly Boilermakers fans, I would say, but I mean, you just know it's going to be a pretty solid, entertaining game. Iowa, Northwestern, two traditional rivals, a big game for both teams, as you guys have alluded to in the Big Ten West standings. And I think a lot of Northwestern fans, even though they may not be showing up to games at Ryan Field, are definitely feeling a sense of positive momentum and optimism regarding the program, which is absolutely necessary after not only this summer, but the last 2 years. So I think people will go out in droves, and I would expect pretty much close to a sellout for this one.
What's the capacity of Wrigley? Do we know that?
I want to say 40-something thousand, but
it might be a little high for baseball.
I would think it'd be pretty packed. I can't imagine.
41,649 is the official capacity.
Is that for baseball?
Right.
They must have put more seats in there. Used to be 37 something. 41. Okay. And we can trust that they have now figured out how to set the football field within the baseball field.
Yeah, that is right. I mean, there definitely will be two end zones this time around, unlike in 2013 when Northwestern took on Illinois and the teams were going the same direction. There were definitely two end zones. I think part of what was fun about the game was I don't think they were kicking nets, or there was something weird where when people would attack extra points or field goals, the balls would go into the stands and students would just catch them being in the bleachers. So we'll see if that happens again this time around.
You remember this, right, Corey? Where both offenses had to be run in the same direction. They had to do all the kickoffs in the same direction because the end zone on one end ran into the brick wall. So they couldn't have any plays in that end zone.
I vaguely remember that. I'm assuming that's been remedied because I haven't heard anything about that happening again. I don't understand how you could even defend doing that. I mean, I just don't understand.
Well, if you think about it, there's never going to be a play in that end zone even if there's a pick six, as soon as he crosses the goal line, it's a touchdown. Like you don't need the corners of the end zone. But yeah, it negates the whole idea of the way the game's structured is you flip ends of the field and you play with different wind or against the wind and all that business. Yeah.
Sunlight, everything that goes in playing outdoors. It's not an AFL game. The Iowa Barnstormers. I don't know I don't even know what league they're in now, but I'm assuming they're still playing down in Des Moines. But Mark, you know about AFL football where the receivers are getting a running head start at the line of scrimmage, and then their end zone is literally up against the wall, so you have guys trying to catch the ball in the stands and all this nonsense. So hopefully it's not gonna be that way with a brick wall. I hope not.
Yeah, I don't think so. That's good news.
All right. Bradley Locker, you can catch his work at InsideNU.com. It's on SB Nation. Bradley, I'm sure you've got a lot of different looks at the game on SB Nation.
Yeah, for sure. We have, I mean, we had the presser notes go up this week from what David Braun said, a lot more coverage. Previewing, we had a story go up today, kind of 3 matchups to watch in this game. One of them was about the over-under and whether the teams will hit that. We'll have more about why Northwestern will or won't win, all that type of stuff coming up. So definitely a lot more on our end.
Bradley, we appreciate you stopping by. Thank you for the breakdown.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thanks so much. And always love speaking to you guys. I want to say it's the 3rd straight year I've done this, which kind of makes me feel really old, even though I'm only a junior in college, but it's really nice to be back here for sure.
Yeah, I cannot in any way accept that statement. So you got a plenty of time. Yeah. So enjoy the game. It should be an interesting one. As Corey notes, weird things could happen in this one for sure.
Oh, yeah. I would expect plenty of weird things. Let me just say that.